B'Shem Hashem Naaseh V'Nasliach. We begin Masechet Baba Kama, which means the middle gate. This is the middle of 3 units that all make up a large Masechet called Masechet Nizikin. Baba Kama is the first unit, Unit 1, Baba Mesia, Unit 2, and Baba Batra will be Unit 3, each of them 10 Perakim long. So we split it up for convenience, but really, originally, these Mishnayot were all 30 Perakim of Mishnayot all in one unit. This helps answer the question that many people ask. Why are we starting with the topic that we do? The first chapter, Baba Mesia, is talking about when two people find things, who does it belong to? That's the first Mishnah here. The second Mishnah, the second Perek of Baba Mesia is going to talk about, are you allowed to keep, when can you keep something that you find, and when do you have to return it? If there's a sign on it, if you can tell whose it is, then you have to return it. So really logically we should have started with the second Perek, right? What items do you have to return and what items can you keep? Once you establish which items you can keep, then it makes sense to ask, well, if 2 people find it or 2 people claim that they each found it first, then who should get it? So really, this Perek should have been second, and the second one should have been first. So one answer, Tosafot says, is that this Perek is following up on the previous Perek. The end of Baba Kama was also talking about items that you have to make shivu'ah when there's a dispute about who owns it. And so we're continuing on that theme. So you see, it's important to know that this is actually all one continuous Masechet. All right, we begin. Shenayim ochazin betalit. Ze omer ani mesatiha veze omer ani mesatiha. Ze omer kula sheli veze omer kula sheli. Ze yishaba she'en lo ba pachot mechesya. Veze yishaba she'en lo ba pachot mechesya. Ve'yachloku. 2 people walk into Betin, and they all are both holding on to a talit, a garment. The word talit doesn't mean the way we refer to it as a ritual garment, something that you put sisit on specifically in order to fulfill the mitzvah of sisit. Talit just means a garment. It could be a scarf or a blanket or a toga, anything. If it happens to have 4 corners, then you also need to put sisit on it. Otherwise, if it's a different shape, then you wouldn't need to put sisit on it. So the word talit just means a garment, and since it if it has 4 corners, we put sisit, so we came to use it as a 4-corner garment, the sisita specifically. Okay, but the point is that there's 2 people holding on to a talit. The Gemara later will explain that they're holding on to the edges of it, or to the tassels of it, not to the garment itself, because if they're holding on to the garment itself, then they can take whatever they're holding on to without having to make a vow, because it's in their possession. But here they're both holding on to the edges. Now, here's the claim. One of them says, I found it first, and the other says, no, I found it first. One of them says, it's all mine, and one of them says, it's all mine. The Gemara opening of the Gemara is going to discuss, is this all one case or 2 separate cases? A simple reading of the Mishnah is that it's all one case, and this is a heading. I found it. The other one says I found it, and within that heading there are 2 subcases. If they claim it's all mine, and we're going to see the next case where they don't both claim that it's all mine. Okay, so let's just follow a simple reading for now. And so they both, one says I found it first, the other says no, I found it first, and one says I had in mind to take all of it when I picked it up, and so all of it is mine. And the other one says, no, I found it first. I picked it up first with intention to acquire the whole thing. So they're both claiming 100% of the item. So what are we going to do? The Bet Din, we have no proof. There are no witnesses. And so therefore the Bet Din says both of them have to make a vow that they own not less than half. The Bet Din is not going to make them both take a vow on their entire claim, because then if each of them claim the whole thing is mine, then it's evident that one of them is definitely lying. And we don't want to set up a situation where there's a definite vow, that false vow that's taking place. And in any case, they're all each going to get only half. So therefore, each one makes a vow that they have at least half. And then they split it, they divide it. They can cut it in half if they want, or they can sell it and divide the money. And so that's fair. We're going to see at the end of the daf today that this vow is not a deoraita vow, but rather one that the rabbis imposed, because we want to prevent people from going and grabbing some item I see that you have something. If I just grab half of it, then I come to Bet Din, and then I'll automatically split it, and I get half, even without making a vow. So in order to discourage people from doing that, we're going to say, listen, you're going to have to make a vow. Evidently, even thieves are afraid of vows. That's just human psychology. So that's case number one, when each claim that the whole thing is there. Subcase two, ze omer kula sheli v'ze omer hasya sheli. Haomer kula sheli shaba she'en lo ba pachot mishelosha halakim. V'haomer hasya sheli shaba she'en lo ba pachot me'rebiya. Ze notel shelosha halakim v'ze notel rebiya. One says, again, I found it, I picked it up first, and it's all mine. I had intention to take it all for myself when I picked it up, and I got it first. And the other one says, half of it is mine. Again, I picked it up, but it's very big. I'm a small person. I don't need this giant thing. So I had intention, I'm going to pick it up, and I'm only going to acquire half. But I did pick it up first before you picked it up and took and decided that you think the whole thing is yours. So in this case, the adjudication is different. The one who says it's all mine, he will make a vow that he has not less than 3/4 of it. And the one who claims half of it, will make a vow that he has at least 1/4 of it. And then the one who claimed the entire thing gets 3/4 of it, and the one who claimed half gets 1/4 of it. What's the logic? The logic is that both of them agree that half of it belongs to the party that says it's all mine. So there's no disagreement about that half of it, right? Even the guy who said half is mine, so he agrees that half is not mine. And so therefore we take the part that's undisputed and we give it to one party who says it's all his. So what is disputed? Only the other half is disputed. So then we treat that separately. That half of that's disputed becomes like the first case, where half of that half, so one person says is his, and half of that half the person says is all his. So they're splitting that half, and that's why one gets 1/4 and one gets his half that's not disputed, plus the other 1/4. Okay, good. So we learn an important principle of how to divide here. Now we have a similar case to the first one, but in a different scenario. Hayu shenaim rochbim al gabe behema, or sheya echad roche ve'echad manhig, or ze omer kula sheli veze omer kula sheli. Ze yishaba she'en lo ba pachot mechesya, veze yishaba she'en lo ba pachot mechesya. Ve'yachloku. If two people were riding on an animal, or one was sitting on an animal riding it, and the other one was leading it by the halter, by its strings, and then the same thing. One of them says it's all mine, the other says it's all mine. So each one will have to make a vow that they have not less than half, and they will split the animal. And here they're not going to cut the animal in half because that would be less valuable, but rather they'll sell the animal and divide the money. This seems to be the same as the first case. So what's new here? Why do we need to know this? The answer is that it's teaching us something about how to acquire an animal. Unlike a regular movable item like a garment, where you just if you're holding on to it by picking it up, that's how you make an acquisition. So if you find something, if there's something lost on the floor, as long as you come and pick it up, that's an acquisition. But animals, a camel is going to be hard to pick up. Instead, the way you acquire an animal is either by riding it or by pulling it by its reins. And each of them are actually equal ways of acquiring it. So it doesn't matter if both of them are riding the animal, or one is riding and one is leading it. Both of those are forms of acquisition. And so that's the same as two people holding on to a talit. Each of them has an equal claim to acquiring it first. And again, we have an introduction of this is I found it and it's all mine. So basically the structure is a talit with two subcases, and so this says I found, the other one says I found it. That's the overall title, and that title actually can apply to the animal. That each they can come in and say I found it first, and the other one says I found it first, and then they make their claim and it's all mine, and the other one also says it's all mine. we can fill in the subcase of this. If one said it's all mine, one says a quarter, then it's obvious they would split it 3/4 and 1/4. But they don't need to say that because we can figure that out ourselves. All right, the end of the Mishnah. Bizman shehem modim o sheyesh lahem edim cholkim belo shevuah. If they admit to the validity of each other, they say, listen, I picked it up, but I'm not sure if maybe you were first, maybe I was first, and they agree that half of it could be the others. In that case, they would split it, and they don't have to make a vow because they're not disagreeing. There's no need to make a vow. Or if there was witnesses, and the witnesses said, we saw that you got half and that you got half, then they don't need to make a vow. Instead, they simply split it. The vow is only when there's an overlapping and contradictory claim, and there's no witnesses and no agreement. All right, that is the Mishnah. The Gemara, here's the structure of the Gemara that we're going to see. First, we're going to ask how many cases are being discussed in the opening of the Mishnah. Is it one case about finding, or is it actually two cases about finding and two claims about buying? Then once we conclude that, we're going to ask who is the author, and we're going to wonder, is it not Benanas? Is it not Sumchos? That's what we'll get up to today. And tomorrow, we'll ask also, is it not Rabbi Yoseh? Okay, that's the overall structure. So now we ask, Lama li limitna ze omed ani mesatiha ve ze omed ani mesatiha, ze omed kula sheli ve ze omed kula sheli. Litni hada. Gemara is wondering about the extra wording of the Mishnah. Gemara treats the Mishnah almost like we treat Pesukim. That there shouldn't be extra words, shouldn't be verbose, which is true. The Mishnah is very concise. So this is a good question. Why does it say that this one says, I found it, and the other one says, I found it? And furthermore, it's all mine, and the other one says it's all mine. Just say one of these phrases and leave out the other, and it'll be all the same thing. So the way I explained it is in a Peshat way. It's just a literary form. It's starting with a title. If one says I found it first, one says I found it first. Subcase 1. They each claim it's all theirs. Subcase 2, one says it's all mine and one says it's half mine. However, that still assumes that there's a general and specific, and then that is still extra words to have a general and specific. So the Gemara is not reading it that way. Instead, it says, why not just say one of these phrases? Hadakatane, and so the answer is, in fact, there's one case here. Ze omer ani mesatia vechula sheli, veze omer ani mesatia vechula sheli. What the Mishnah means to say is, one says I found it, and therefore it's all mine, and the other says I found it first, and therefore it's all mine. But really, we're talking about just one case. So we ask, if that's what the Mishnah means to say, well then they could just claim, I found it, meaning I found it first, and then it would be obvious that what he means is, and therefore it's all mine. So you don't need to add an extra clause and say, this one says I found it first, this one says I found it first, this one says it's all mine, this one says it's all mine. Just take away the second line. Isn't that obvious? And the answer is no, it's not obvious. Itana ani mesatiha, hava amina my mesatiha reitiha, afagav de la ata lide, beriya be'alma kane, tanakula sheri de beriya la kane. No, it would not be obvious because if it said just I found it first, I might have thought that what does it mean I found it first? I saw it first. This is like, you ever driving and you see an open spot, parking spot on the other side of the street. And so, okay, you need to make a U-turn. So you make a U-turn. By the time you're making a U-turn, someone else comes that was a block away and swoops in and takes the spot, right? And you go and yell at them, says, I got the spot first. And he's actually in the spot. He says, what are you talking about? I got the spot first. And you weren't here. So no, but I saw the spot from across the street. I eyed it. And therefore I claimed it just by seeing it. Is that valid or not? So you might have thought that is a valid form of acquisition, right? I saw that lost item. I saw it on the floor from across the street, and I eyed it, and I said, I'm going to go get it, right? And then you came out of a doorway afterwards. You hadn't seen it, but then you were closer and you got it first. So I might have thought that misatiha, found it, just means see it, even if I didn't actually pick it up. That it would be enough just to see it in order to acquire it. But that's not true. That's why we need to add the words and it's mine, right? Amini misatiha, and it's mine because only by picking something up can you actually acquiring it, not by looking at it. And so it adds the words, these extra words, it's all and it's mine, in order to clarify that I physically picked it up and I didn't just see it. Okay. Umi masit amat mai mesati hareitiha veha amar rabenai umsata data lide mashma. Wait, can you really? Would anybody really think that misatiha, I found it, means I just saw it and that would be enough? That can't be, because there's a midrash on the pasuk in Devarim that says, this is what you should do with any lost item of your brother which he has lost, and you have found it. Umsata, and Rabbenai says, what does umsata mean? That that item came into your possession, meaning you have to physically take it. It's not enough to see it. It actually has to come into your physical possession. So we see that the word umsata means physical possession, and there's no way that you can explain the word misata just to mean I saw it, right? And that's obvious from this pasuk and Rabbenai's midrash on this pasuk. As an aside, who is Rabbenai? He is actually an Amora, but does his name belong here? This is the fantastic website geniza.org, and anyone can get a free account. Just go to Geniza with an H.org, and the entire Shas has been typed in, including every single manuscript, almost every manuscript that is available for every Masechet. And so here, this is our daf, and you can see the first three lines are this is Rabbenai. That's the Vilna printed editions. The next two lines are other earliest printed editions, and this has Ravinai as well. However, as you can see here, all of the manuscripts simply say Ravina, including a Cairo Geniza fragment, which is generally the best, most reliable fragment. So therefore, it looks like the author of this statement is in fact Ravina and not Rabbenai, although Rabbenai is an Amora. All right, so Ravina said that the word umsata in the Torah teaches us that it has to be physically in your hand, and therefore nobody would have thought that if I said ani mitzatiha, that just meant I saw it. And we answer to that in umsata dikra da'ata li de mashma umihu tana lishana de alma nakat. Yeah, you're right. Everybody knows that the word umsata in the pasuk means that it comes physically into your hand. But this Mishnah is not using the vocabulary of the Torah, but rather the vocabulary of colloquial language. And so that's the way people generally say umsata, I found it. Sometimes what they mean is that they saw it first. So we have to clarify that they didn't just see it, they actually picked it up. And so once the person saw it, they might say, I found it. And even though they didn't pick it up in their hand, they might think that just by seeing it, they acquire it. And that's why the Mishnah adds the words, it's all mine, to say, that's mine, I physically acquired it, and I didn't only see it. Okay, so that answers that question. But we follow up. Why not just say the second line? Two people are holding on to a garment, and one says it's all mine, and the other says it's all mine. Just write that, and don't write I found it. Why do I need that? If they say it's all mine, well, then how'd they get it? It must be that they acquired it by picking it up first. Tana ani mesatiha v'hadar tana kula sheli de mi mishna yetera ashminan deriya la kaneh. And the answer is, if it were just right, it's all mine, I might have thought that in general, in other cases where it does use the word matzah, so if you didn't put the word metzatiha in this Mishnah, I might have thought when I find the word metzatiha in other sources, then that means just seeing it without actually picking it up. So you know what? This Mishnah goes out of its way to add in an extra line, ani metzatiha, and then also add kula sheli to teach me that the word metzatiha always means physically picking it up and just seeing it will not acquire it. Now, all this seems to be not necessarily the peshat of the Mishnah. We're treating the Mishnah almost like a pasuk, that an extra word comes to teach us something completely new. And it could be that the Gemara here very well knows that, but is going through this dialectic in order to teach us actually this very important principle itself. In general, the opening sugya of most masechtot and even some perakim is a kind of overture to the entire masechet. Often, as is the case here, it's there are no named amoraim, even though we saw Ravina. That was just a quote of what Ravina says elsewhere. But besides that, the give and take is not by named amoraim, but rather by stam, anonymous, which probably means it's the editors of the Talmud that are adding this as an introduction to the entire masechet. And as they do that, number one, what's characteristic of these opening sugyot is that they often focus on the language of the Mishnah, right? Very technical questions about why does it use this language and not that language, or the order of the words. So that's one. And they are also often introducing many themes that will come up. And so over here, through this question and answer, whether or not it's the peshat of the Mishnah, the point is that by asking the question and answering it in this way, even though actually this whole line of thinking is going to be rejected, that this is all one case, nevertheless, we go through the exercise because on the way, we get to learn really important principles like this one, that when you find something, you have to physically pick it up in order to acquire it, and it's not enough just to eyeball it. Okay, umi masit amart hada katani, veha ze veze katani, ze omer ani mesatia, veze omer ani mesatia, ze omer kula sheli, vechule. And so finally, even though we answered all those questions, we ask, can you really say that the entire Mishnah is talking about one case? You cannot, because it's separated by different quotes of statements. So it says ze and ze. It doesn't say, one person says, I found it and it's all mine, and the other one says, I found it and it's all mine, which would just be two quotes. Instead, it has four quotes. This one says, I found it first. The other one says, I found it first. And then a new conversation, right? A second conversation. This one says, all mine. This one says, all mine. And that suggests that it's a new conversation. It's a new case altogether. And therefore, we introduce the next answer. Amara papavi temarav shimi bar ashev amri la kedi resha b'mesia v'sefa b'mikach umimkar. This is actually the first Amoraic statement, right? By a quoted Amorah, Rav Papa, from the fifth generation of Amoraim, and another says, say Rav Shimi said it, another say anonymously, that in fact there are two cases in the Mishnah. The Resha, when it says Ani Mesatia, I found it, that's talking about a case of an object that was lost, and two people come and they find it, and each one claims that they found it first and it's all theirs. And the Sefa just means relative to the first line, it's actually just the second line, is when one says it's mine, it's all mine, the other one says all mine, that's when they each bought it. This thing was on sale in a store, and each one claims, I went into the store and paid for it and bought it, and the other one says, no, I'm the one that paid for it and bought it. Somehow they both paid and they both walked out holding the item together. And so they're both claiming. So it's actually talking about two different cases. Let's look at the structure of this section, right? So we start with one case and then two cases. If we look at the back and forth itself, you see that first we ask a question: why do we need both statements? I found it and it's all mine. So we first try to say it's really talking about one case, and we need ani mesatia and I need kula sheli in order to teach us that just by looking at something you do not acquire it, right? And that's why I need mesatia, and that's why I need kula sheli to teach me that that's true in general. So we have one challenge, we answer it. Second challenge, we answer it, and then third challenge says no, but it's two different conversations. Has four quotations, and so that looks like it's talking about two different two sides from two different conversations, and therefore this entire A is all rejected. It's not one case, but rather the Papa says we're talking about two cases here. And so next we're going to have also three questions about this. Why do we need both of these cases? Why do you have to tell me that the law is the same when you find it, and also if two people claim to have bought it, and that's what we're about to talk about. So you see that the structure of the sugya is really perfect and symmetrical. We have a question, answer one with three challenges. The third one we cannot answer, so therefore answer two. And here also we're going to have three challenges, and then we will accept that answer. Okay, usericha. So why do I need both cases? Both where they claim to have found it and where they claim to have bought it. Di tana Mesia v'amina Mesiahu d'ramur Rabbanan shibua ale mishum demore ve'amar havrai lav midi hasar ba azil v'itpis v'itpilig behadeh aval mikachu mimkar deleka lememar hachi emala. If you only had the case where each one claims to have found it, I would have thought only in the case of a found item, that's where the rabbis imposed a vow. You see, this is a rabbinic vow. This is actually what we're going to see at the end of this sugya, but the Gemara here already assumes that you know that. And so why would the rabbis have imposed, we might have thought, that the rabbis would have imposed only on the case of finding, because each of them will think to himself, my friend is not losing anything. This is a found item, right? But in the morning today, neither of us had a garment, and so now this guy, well, he picked it up, but I also picked it up, and whether I did it before, I did it later, my friend will not be losing anything if I claim it. So you know what? Even though he picked it up first, I'll go and seize it, and I'll get half, right? Because he just picked it up 1 minute ago, and he's not losing anything. He's still gaining something since the morning. And so therefore, it's likely that people will justify, it is stealing still, because the other one picked it up first, but people will more easily justify stealing in the case of a found item where the other guy, in the end, still didn't lose out anything. And so that's why the rabbis are going to impose a vow. So to make sure that you better be serious that you picked it up first, because you're going to make a vow about it. And so we want to discourage people from justifying going and grabbing found items. But we might have thought, if it's a case of selling, where he's not going to say that because the other guy paid for it and paid for it first. So now a person's not going to just come in and grab it and say, oh, it's mine. People aren't so brazen. It's true. I mean, there are totally brazen thieves that will do anything. But most people, they lie a little bit. They steal, if they can justify it. So the rabbis are particularly careful when it's more justifiable in their minds, still stealing no matter what, but if it's more justifiable in their minds, then they may do that. So we're going to pose a vow on the case of finding, but not on the case of buying, we might have thought, and that's why the Mishnah has to include the extra case of buying, that even there, some people will justify and say, oh, he bought it first, but I wanted that item, and they'll go quickly pay the cashier and go out and they'll grab the other half of the item. And so therefore, since people may do that, we need to impose a vow on them as well. Now, if I only had the case of buying, where they each claim to have bought it, if you only had the case where each claimed to have bought it, I might have thought that that's where the rabbis imposed a vow, because each one can justify to himself and say, well, my friend paid for it, but I also paid for it. We're talking about a case where, they're in the store, I see someone paying for an item, I go quickly to the other cashier and I pay for it also. And now I got to it second, but I force the guys, no, take this money, I'm buying it, right? I put the money in his hands and I go and grab it. So in that case, I can justify and say, well, just like he paid for it, I also paid for it. And so just like I really need this for myself, so I'm going to take the other half of it, and then I'll get it, and then he'll go and get another one, or he'll get his money back, and he'll have to find another one of that item. So a person might justify to himself stealing something when he paid for it, even though he paid for it second and really is stealing. But regarding a found item where I'm not paying for it, he didn't pay for it, but I'm not paying for it, it would be harder for me to justify just going and grabbing something that someone already found. And so I might think that the rabbis wouldn't impose a vow in that case. That's why the Mishnah has to talk about both cases. But different people will justify grabbing things in different cases. We want to avoid people going and grabbing items that belong to other people, whether they just found it or they just bought it. and therefore the rabbis, in fact, imposed a vow on both cases, and we need to know that. Okay, good. So now that we know that, we ask, Mikach umimkad velecheze zuzeh miman nakat. How could you say that part of this Mishnah is talking about a case of buying and selling, and we don't know who bought it? Just let's go see who did go ask the cashier, who did you take money from, right? Who bought this item? Doesn't he know? And the answer is la sericha de nakat mitarvaihu. We're talking about a case where he took money from both of them. Mechad midate u mechad be'al korche ve'layadana mihu midate u mihu be'al korche. One of them he accepted the money willingly, right? Meaning he wanted to actually sell it to that person, and another one was against his will. The other person says, "I'm buying it," and he shoved the money in his hand, right, and didn't wasn't with the agreement of the seller. It's not that the seller willingly sold it to two people. He had in mind to sell it to one person who was the legitimate buyer, and the other one forced his hand and is not a legitimate buyer. However, the seller doesn't remember which one was the real buyer and which one was against his will. So therefore, the seller, the cashier, is no help, and that's why we're stuck and we don't know which is which. And that is the case that we're talking about. So to go back here, right? So to review the structure. We wondered, why does it say two lines at the beginning, and we proposed that it's talking about one case, 3 arguments, but we rejected it, and we answered that it's ended up talking about 2 cases, and that we accepted. Now, as we said at the beginning, it seems, at least to me at least, that the Peshat of the Mishnah is in fact talking about one case, and the opening line is a general statement. If 2 people pick something up, and one says I found it first, one says I found it first, that's the opening statement, and then there's a subcase if they each claim the whole thing, and then subcase 2 is if one of them claims half of it, and therefore it's all one case, and there are really no extra words. Let's assume that the Gemara also read it that way. If so, why would they then come and say it's 2 cases, almost the same way rabbis make a derasha on a pasuk that has a peshat, and there it's evident what the peshat of the pasuk is. Many times words aren't really extra, but dibrat Torah kosher and bnei adam, it's just a normal way of speaking. But nevertheless, we derive extra meaning from pesukim, and it seems that the opening sugya here is doing the same idea, and wondering, well, the Mishnah is talking about a case of finding, but what if a similar case where they both claim to have bought it, right? What would the case be there? So by reading into the words of the Mishnah, almost as a principle of omni-significance, that every line of the Mishnah is significant, we learn another halacha, right, of how this would apply to a case of buying it as well. So you see, this is really a very beautiful opening sugya that covers a lot of ground and already gives us a lot of introduction of how to think about the cases as we go forward. So it's kind of like just like an overture to a Broadway play that gives you many of the themes that you're going to hear coming up. So too, this sugya does the same thing. All right, that's part 1 of the sugya. Now part 2, which I think is also part of this overture, that we look for people that might not be the author of the Mishnah. There's going to be 3 altogether. Today we'll see 2. Lema matnitin de lo keben nanas. Di keben nanas amar kesad elu ve'elu ba'in lideh shivuat shav. It seems that should we propose that this Mishnah is not the opinion of Ben Anas. Now, we'd always rather the Mishnah be across the board, but we have to answer this, right? Is it reconcilable with the opinion of Ben Anas? After all, Ben Anas said in the Mishnah in Shavuot that how can 2 people make a vow that is in vain? We should never set up a situation where 2 people are making a vow in vain. The case that Ben Anas was talking about there is an employer who's paying the laborer, and he tells laborer, listen, you worked all day today, I owe you $100 for your labor. Instead of cash, you know what, go to this store, this grocery store, and get anything you want for $100, and he'll put it on my tab. The store, he says, okay. Sometime later, the laborer says, the shopkeeper never gave me anything. You still owe me the money. But the shopkeeper claims, I gave it to him. He bought milk and eggs, $100 worth of stuff. I did give it to him. And so the law, according to Ben Nanas, is that the employer has to pay the shopkeeper $100, and he has to pay the laborer also $100. That's what Ben Nanas said. The rabbis agreed to that, but the rabbis added that they both have to make an oath. The laborer has to make an oath that he didn't receive any goods from the shopkeeper, and the storekeeper has to make an oath that he didn't give anything. And Ben Anas challenges the rabbis and says, Kesad elu ve'elu ba'in lidei shuvat shav. You're going to have them both stand there in court, side by side, and one's going to say, I never received $1. And the storekeeper said, I gave you $100 worth of goods. One of them is lying. And this is a chilul Hashem to have two people in court that are directly contradicting each other. That's what Ben Anas said. But Rabbanan were okay with it, but Ben Anas was not. So now, in this case, where each one comes and says, the whole thing's mine, and the other one says, I picked it up first, the whole thing's mine. The other one says, I picked it up first, and says the whole thing is mine. Even when they make a vow, that one says half is mine, well, if the other one picked up the whole thing first, having in mind to acquire the entirety, then the whole thing is his, and your vow is false. And if, on the other hand, what the other person said is true, that he picked it up and acquired the entire thing, then the other vow, that other guy who made a vow that half of it is his, is false. One of their vows must be false. And so it must be that this Mishnah is not the opinion of Ben Anas, because Mishnah says they do both make vows. And we answer and say, no, not so. Afilu tema Ben Anas. Our Mishnah can be Ben Anas. Hatam vadaika shivot shav, hachaika lememar, deleka shivot shav, emu de tarvaihu, be'adeh hadadeh agbehu. In that case of the store owner, for sure, one of them is lying. Either the store owner gave him goods worth $100 or he didn't, and they're saying totally opposite things. However, in this case, it could be that they're both telling the truth, because it's possible that they lifted up at exactly the same time. Maybe they didn't realize, maybe one really thought that he picked it up first and the other one thought he picked it up first. But if in fact they picked it up at the exact same moment, then they acquire it together, and each one acquires half. It's like they're partners, and each one really does own half, and so they're not lying when one makes a vow and says half is mine, and the other makes a vow and says half is his. All right, and now last person, lema matintin de la kesumchus, di kesumchus ha'amar mamon mutar besafek cholkin belo shivua. It seems that our Mishnah is not like the opinion of Sumchus, because Sumchus said that when you have money and we're in doubt about whose it is, then we split it without taking an oath. And this Mishnah says they have to make an oath. So it seems that this Sumchus would not be the author. So we ask, so what do you think? It's Rabbanan? But Rabbanan didn't say that they split it in half. Rabbanan said the principle of, if someone wants to extract money from someone else, then the burden of proof is on him. And so if you don't have proof, then you get zero. They didn't say you split it. They said one keeps what he already has, and the other one gets zero. And that's not the law here. So then it couldn't be Samchus, and it couldn't be Rabbanan. It wouldn't be anybody. So Haimai, we say, well, there's no comparison between our Mishnah and the case of Rabbanan. Iyamat bishlama Rabbanan, hatam de la tafseh tarvaihu, Amru Rabbanan mosim achavero alav hareaya. Hacha de tarvayu tafseh palge ba b'shivua. Rabbanan was discussing a case where neither party was holding on to the item. The actual case that they were discussing there is where, let's say I have an ox that gores, and it gores your cow. Your cow had been pregnant before. So when we come to the scene, we didn't actually see what happened, but by the time we get to the scene, we see that my ox gored your cow, and there's a dead fetus next to the cow. However, we're not sure when that fetus got there. It's possible that my ox caused the fetus to come out, and therefore I would have to pay not only for the damage of the cow, but also damage to the fetus. However, and that's what you claim. However, I claim, well, not necessarily. I mean, we're not sure, but I say it could be that your cow had a stillbirth before my ox got on the scene, and the fetus has nothing to do with it, and therefore I'm not responsible for it at all. I'm only responsible for the cow. In such a case, neither of us were there, so neither of us know what happened, and that's where Sumchus says, listen, split it, split the value of the fetus without an oath, and Rabbanan said, you, the owner of the cow, want me, the owner of the ox, to pay. you go and find proof. Go find a camera, a witness, find something that shows that it was pregnant at the time that it was gored, and then I'll pay. Otherwise, I pay nothing. That's where Rabbanan said, Hamotzi mechavedo lavaraya, because no one has a grasp on the item that they're claiming. They just have claims but don't know what it is, and there's nothing that they're holding on to. That's completely different from our case, where both are showing up into court holding on to a garment, and so they have not only a claim but also grasping something. How are you going to do mesima chavedo lavaraya? They both have an equal grasp on it, so neither of them is mosi mechavedo. Instead, the Rabbanan say here, split it without a vow. So therefore, our Mishnah could readily be Rabbanan. There is no problem with that. Rather, the problem is making it sumchus. Ela iamat sumchus hashta umahatam de la tafseh tarvayu chulkin belo shivua hacha de tarvayu tafseh la lo kol sheken. Sumchus, we would say, doesn't make sense if sumchus in that case of the dead fetus says that where neither of the parties are holding on to anything, and yet sumchus says not the mosim echad lavaraya, but rather split it, and you go into my bank account and force me to pay for half the fetus. If sumchus, and you do that without any vow, if sumchus would say you force me to pay half without any vow, even in a case where I have to go into my pocket and pay, and you're not holding on to anything, then all the more so here, where both parties are holding on to something and therefore have a stronger claim and actual attachment to the thing, all the more so that sumchus should say we split it without a vow. And if the Mishnah, as it says split it with a vow, it seems like our Mishnah is not the opinion of sumchus, but we want to keep defending. We want the Mishnah to be unanimous. So therefore we say, afilu tema sumchus, ki amar sumchus shema veshema, aval bari ubari lo amar. When sumchus says you can split something without a vow, that's only when we each have uncertain claims. Neither of us claim to have been there at the time of the accident. I claim maybe it gave birth to a stillborn before. You say, no, the ox caused it to have a stillborn. Since we're both about a maybe, so sumchus says, you know what, split it. You don't have to make a vow, because what are you making a vow of? Nobody's sure. I can't make a vow that I know 100%. So there it makes sense not to have a vow. But if both parties are sure, like in our Mishnah, right, so I say, I picked it up first, and I have the whole thing. Since I am sure, and I want to take something, therefore it makes sense to impose a vow, and therefore it could be Rabbanan. Okay, this answer is good according to this interpretation of sumchos, but within sumchos there is another interpretation. Ulrabba ba Rav Huna damar amar sumchus afilu bari ubari ma'ika lememar. Sumchos is a tana. The Amora Rabba ba Rav Huna has a different interpretation of sumchus. This interpretation was mentioned already back in Baba Kama. In the fun we can say back in Baba Kama. He says that according to sumchos, even if there's both certain claims, still one is not required. One splits without a vow, right? According to Rabba Rav Huna's interpretation of sumchus, they never make a vow. You split it without a vow. So here, where there's bari ubari, they should also split it without a vow. So what about according to Rabba Rav Huna? Can sumchus still be the author of our Mishnah? Yes. Afilu tema sumchus ki amar sumchus hechad ika derara de mamona, aval hechad deleka derara de mamona la. Our Mishnah is, in fact, also according to the opinion of sumchus. When did sumchus say that you split without making a vow? That's only when there is certain financial loss. That's the case of the fetus, where either I should pay for the fetus or I shouldn't pay for the fetus if it happened before or after, and therefore, whether I pay or not pay, someone is going to have a definite financial loss. Someone is right and someone is wrong. Either I owe money or I don't. So when there's going to be certain financial loss, that's where sumchus says, split it and don't make a vow. But if there's no certain financial loss, where both parties can be right, like in this case where we both claim to have found an item, and it could be that we picked it up at the same time, and therefore we in fact do each own half. Since it's possible that there is no loss, and really it's half is mine and half is yours, therefore sumchus would agree that you should make a vow. So he only said that they don't make a vow when there's definite financial loss, but when there is no definite financial loss, that's our Mishnah, then they divide and they do make a vow. Now we ask about that. Velav kal vachomer hu. Wait a second. This logic doesn't make sense. Shouldn't it be the other way around? Ma hatam deika derada mamona lemor. Vika derada mamona lemor. Vika lememar kula lemor. Vika lememar kula lemor. Amar sumchus mamona mutabas hefik cholkin belo shivua. Hacha deleka derada mamona. Dika lememar dadvayu lo kol sheken. If in that case of the fetus, where there's definite financial loss, the two claims are overlapping and they cannot both be right. That's for this one and for the other one. Each one of them has a claim that overlaps the other one, and there will be financial loss. It could be that either that I should definitely pay for all the fetus, or I should pay for none of the fetus. And yet, there Sumchus said that we split without making a vow. Here, where there is no definite financial loss, and we could both be right, so there is more room to say, you know what, you take half, without making a vow, right? There's more reason to believe the two parties when it's possible that they're both right and they're not necessarily contradicting each other. So if Simchus said no vow, split without a vow over there with the fetus, all the more so he should say split without a vow in our case of finding an item in our Mishnah. That's the question, but we finally answer afilu tema sumchus. No, we can say that this Mishnah, even so, is also the opinion of sumchus. Shivua zo midrabanan hi kid Rabbi Yochanan damar Rabbi Yochanan shivua zo takanat chachamim hi shelo yehe kol echad ve'echad holech ve'tokef betalito shel chavero ve'omer sheli hu. This vow in our Mishnah is a drabanan vow. From the letter of the law, you don't have to make a vow, and that's what sumchus says, and that's the law that he was applying regarding the fetus. The vow in this Mishnah is a special vow that the rabbis instituted, as Rabbi Yochanan taught. That the rabbis instituted this vow so that we won't have each and every person going and grabbing the garment of someone else and claiming it's mine, knowing that, I could just come to court, and although he's holding on to half of it, because as he was holding it, I grabbed half, and now I'll go to court and they'll give me half. We don't want to encourage such behavior, and therefore we'll discourage it by saying, you know what, you have to make a vow. That ordinance of the rabbis makes sense in cases where they're actually grabbing and holding on to a thing. The rabbis wouldn't need to make such an ordinance regarding the fetus, right? What I'm going to do, I'm going to go have my ox purposely gore some other ox so that I could then pay for half of the damage. Why would I want to do that? I'd rather not pay for anything and not be involved in an accident and have my ox gore anything. So therefore, there's no need to make an ordinance in that case. Only in this case, it makes sense that they would make an ordinance, and therefore sumchos over there is talking about the letter of the law, where when in such cases you split without a vow, all right? And that's true. It doesn't matter whether they're sure or have doubtful claims. And here, this is in fact a special ordinance. So we've come actually a long way, and we went through this exercise of saying, is it not benanas? Is it not sumchus? And all this is to get to this climax, which is really the essence of this Mishnah. What is this shivuah? What is the purpose of this entire law of making the vow in the first place? And in fact, you can see that almost everything in the Gemara before is anonymous editing, except for that opinion of Rav Papa, and here this opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. So you can imagine in the early Gemara, the early layer was Rabbi Yochanan is actually the earliest, is before Rav Papa. So this is like the earliest statement. Rabbi Yochanan read our Mishnah and said, here's what our Mishnah is about. This is why you need to make a vow. But the Gemara builds up to it, and in building up to it, teaches us so many other things about Mamon HaMutal B'Safek, the principle of Mosim HaChaver Alav HaRe'aya. Can you make two vows when they're going to contradict each other? The opinion of Sumchos, with a vow, without a vow. So all these are necessary ingredients that are going to come up again and again throughout the sugya. So for homework, you can review this sugya and make a list of all the important halachot that we learned. By the way, even when we went to a path that was rejected, we still learned many important halachot, and this is a grand overture that set us up on a good foundation to continue and understand the rest of the Masechet. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.